All right, welcome back to Social 20-1. This is a continuation of Lesson 2. You may notice that this is my third different location I'm recording in, so that's always a good time. This is Lesson 2, Causes of the French Revolution, Outcome number 3. We want to understand how the Enlightenment, including key philosophers, inspired the revolution. And there is an assignment that goes with this outcome as well. Please keep a list of philosophers. We want you to keep a list of Locke and Hobbes, Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire, maybe Paine, among others, and write down their thoughts, their ideologies. Typically, their ideologies, an ideology is the way they see the world from Social 10, right? It's their worldview, it's the world that they see now, it's the world that they want to create. It's an assumption about the roles of government and the role of man and the nature of mankind. So that's what their ideology is going to be about. You know, what do they see as the nature of man? Are we good? Are we evil? What is the purpose of government? And yeah, let's keep a list of Locke, Hobbes, Paine, Rousseau, Montesquieu, among others, and see how they might inspire some change away from collectivism towards individualism.
Mrs. Marshall, please contact the office. Thank you.
There are some links that you can go to as well. There's a link to a Hobbes video. Hobbes and Locke are probably the two most important characters we're looking at here. So if the explanation I'm about to give you isn't enough for you, then I would suggest you go back and take a look at those links. One thing that they're looking at, one thing that many of these philosophers talk about is the idea of a social contract, some kind of agreement of individuals to form a government or a society. It's the reason we have a community. It's the reason we have a polis or a municipal government. And Hobbes and Locke will have different ideas about why we have that. Hobbes believes that we surrender our freedom in exchange for protection. And we'll get to why we do that in a moment. John Locke believes that people agree to being governed to safeguard our freedom. So whereas John Locke says the reason we have a social contract is to safeguard our freedom, Hobbes is saying, no, it's to surrender our freedom. They both believe we have a social contract, meaning we have an agreement that we're putting a government into place. What they can't agree on is why we're doing it. And Hobbes and Locke, their main point of disagreeing is because they view the nature of mankind differently. What we have is Hobbes believes that man by nature is violent and selfish. And if we are left, we'd be at a state of war with each other. That in nature we're at a state of war with each other. And in that freedom of nature, there's therefore insecurity. So we must have sacrificed our natural freedom for security. So we surrender our freedom. Because if we're free to act in our natural instincts because we are by nature evil, then we will be a threat to each other. So he believes, Thomas Hobbes believes, that by nature our social contract is about us surrendering our freedom for protection. Whereas John Locke has the opposite point of view, that yes, rights are natural, but we're not surrendering them to our government. Our government is there to further them, to ensure that they're there for us, to safeguard and to promote them. So there's some more thoughts about Hobbes there for you as well, and a long quote about Hobbes. And then there's the video on Locke as well. So John Locke saying that government is there to promote our freedom, to promote our individualism, this is a threat to collectivism and the divine right of kings that we mentioned in our last lecture. That if Locke believes that we are born as equal blank slates and we all have inalienable rights, our rights cannot be alienated from us. They cannot be taken away. Well, the essence of absolutism was that the monarch can do whatever they want because they have the will of God behind them. So Locke's theory is a threat, is a challenge to the divine right of kings. And we have some comparison videos and slides of Locke and Hobbes here, and we have some nice summaries. You know, Locke is optimistic about our human nature, Hobbes is pessimistic. We can add JeanJacques Rousseau into our list as well. Yes, we can. So what do we need to know about Jean-Jacques Rousseau? Well, Rousseau really has a few major talking points that we remember. Rousseau was alive at a time in the 18th century when Europeans were becoming more knowledgeable about the lifestyles of non-Europeans, more specifically about the indigenous peoples of North America. And Rousseau fell in love with the idea of living in nature and living with a sense of less individualism and more collectivism. So in this battle, if you will, or a clash between collective and individualist ideologies, Rousseau did see some value in collectivism because he observed what he called a malaise of modernity, a malaise, M-A-L-A-I-S-E, of modernity. When he walked around France and walked around Paris, he noticed that there was a lot of unhappiness, and he traced the unhappiness to competition, and he traced the competition to private property. So because we looked at others who may have had more private property and we were jealous and envious of that, he believed that we were living unhappy lives. So Rousseau's solution, collective property, public property, collectivism. So Rousseau, in this idea of individualism and collectivism, he's a rare economic collectivist. But he is a political individualist, meaning he does believe in democracy. He believes that we should have our own political sovereignty, our own independence and autonomy. So there we have some quick thoughts on Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau. We have a couple other names there too. Voltaire is most remembered for being a critic. He challenges the status quo. So those who value the status quo are seen as conservatives, and Voltaire decides that the most critical thing that we need to do is be able to establish those institutions, those cornerstones that have gone unquestioned for generations. So Voltaire was a famous critic of the Catholic Church in France because the Catholic Church in France had existed for generations without much criticism or scrutiny. He believed that nothing should be beyond scrutiny. So Voltaire is often married with the idea of the freedom of speech or dissent or discontent, and the idea that we need to be able to challenge and hold governments accountable. Otherwise, they're not legitimate. We also have Montesquieu. Montesquieu will inspire the American Revolution as he's looking to create a system where there's going to be checks and balances. Under the age of absolutism, the monarch had the power to create law, carry out the law, and determine whether the law was legal, the legality of the law, the constitutionality of the law. Well, once we move past the age of absolutism, Montesquieu is challenging the age of absolutism because he's saying that we can't allow one figure to dominate all three branches or responsibilities of government. Because if we do, then we open ourselves up to the potential of tyranny. We're subject to the absolute power of that individual. So America, the United States of America, is built in the vision, the image of Montesquieu. So in this system, you have a legislative branch that makes the laws, and they're separate from the executive branch that carries it out. And they're both separate from the judicial branch that interprets the legality, the constitutionality of the laws. So Montesquieu's remembered, challenging the age of absolutism, celebrating individualism, because he's celebrating a form of democracy where no one person will have the ability to rule all aspects of government. There's a little bit additional information on Voltaire if you need it. Finally, we have Tom.
Unknown caller.
Sorry about that. Finally, we have Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine is going to be directly connected to challenging the authority of the monarch, and by challenging the authority of the monarch, Thomas Paine is introducing this concept of self-determination. Self-determination is the idea that, the citizens, the people, should be able to determine for themselves, what nations they belong to, and who governs those nations. So it's the concept of self-determination in 1776 that fits in with the idea of the American Revolution, that they're seeking self-determination, that the American revolutionaries are proclaiming, no taxation without representation, and the idea that we must determine for ourselves how our tax dollars are spent. So the whole movement of independence for the 13 colonies of America is that they want to determine for themselves their foreign policy. And a part of that was a rejection of this cartoon. The Americans were unhappy with mercantilism, where their trading relationship was limited to their mother country of England, and they wanted to be able to trade with other countries like France. And therefore, a portion of the revolutionary independence movement in America is actually an economic expression. The Americans wanting greater independence from their mother country. So that's self-determination. And self-determination is a key term that you can add to your list of key terms for the year. The ability to, create your own policies, create your own, relationships, both domestic and foreign. And that, my friends, is the end of the outcome, looking at the list of key philosophers. Now, I would argue that we're going to continue to add individuals to that list of cast of characters throughout the course. So we're not done with this assignment yet, but we have a healthy start on it with names like Hobbes and Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. A little bit on Paine. We're going to come back to Burke and others as well, but for now, that's a healthy start on our cast of characters.